It's time to talk about Israel's war of starvation in Gaza. Recently, pro-Israeli commentators have been rejoicing and celebrating the reports claiming that there is no famine in Gaza. Leading these celebrations is Eylon Levy, the disgraced former spokesperson or propagandist and the current self-assigned Israeli citizen spokesperson. A hugely embarrassing and cringeworthy title, considering he was sacked after the former UK Foreign Minister David Cameron and the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Alicia Kearns, exposed him to be a liar. Exposed for the world to see in an open letter shared on Twitter. In an online spat with Alicia Kearns, he claimed that there was unimpeded access to Gaza for aid trucks, and he challenged the world to test his claims by sending as many trucks as they want. Alicia Kearns then extended this challenge to then Foreign Minister David Cameron and asked, "Is it true that there is unrestricted access to Gaza for British aid trucks to deliver food and medicine to the area?" David Cameron then responded by publishing his open letter, exposing Eylon's lies to the world, leading to his dismissal, as the Israeli government threw him under the bus for humiliating them. Eylon now feels some kind of vindication for the report on famine that's recently been released. His tone has been bordering on gloating, demanding an apology from all those who accused Israel of starving Palestinians. Fellow Zionist propaganda organisations like Israel Advocacy Movement have jumped on this bandwagon of disinformation and distasteful gloating. They claim, in Eylon's terms, that the famine of Gaza is a myth, and they claim that there is an abundance of aid entering Gaza, and that it is implausible that there could be a crisis. In fact, Eylon's words are that Israel is literally flooding Gaza with aid. So let's cut through the noise and the propaganda and let's take a look at what's actually going on. In June, the UN Famine Review Committee, or the FRC, released its third report on Gaza. The FRC uses a 5-point scale to categorise food insecurity. IPC Phase 5 is what is defined as famine, and this describes a situation where at least 20% of households in an area are experiencing the most severe outcomes, where acute malnutrition levels exceed 30%, and where more than 2 out of 10,000 people die each day due to hunger or hunger-related disease. In the report, they state that previous projections which predicted famine would occur did not materialise. Owing to an increase in aid to northern Gaza, they said that the available evidence does not indicate that famine is currently occurring. It's this very statement that got Israeli apologists into an excited frenzy. But unpacking the report more closely, we quickly discover the key point being made by the Famine Review Committee. They say that the analysis of insecurity, malnutrition, and mortality has been severely hampered by a lack of physical access to affected populations. This has made it impossible to collect the necessary evidence needed for an accurate IPC assessment. This is entirely unsurprising when we consider the reality on the ground for the last 9 months. So let's take a look. Since October, Israel has killed 500 health workers, 278 aid workers, of whom 201 worked for the UN, and predominantly UNRWA. This is the highest number of aid workers killed in any war zone in recent history. This includes the widely reported targeted killing of 7 aid workers from the World Central Kitchen who were bombed from the air, having already shared their coordinates with the Israelis. Since October, Israel's long-standing defamation and smear campaign of UNRWA has gone into hyperdrive, culminating in Israel convincing many of its allies to withdraw funding for the organisation. Now, whilst multiple nations have resumed funding after Israel provided no evidence for its allegations, UNRWA's operations have nonetheless been severely hampered. UNRWA is the world's largest and most effective humanitarian organisation caring for displaced Palestinians. If anyone is privy to the hardship of Gazans, they are. Not only has Israel been attacking UNRWA's integrity, it has also been attacking its very aid trucks, and even those desperately waiting for food around them. As reported by CNN, Israeli forces fired on a United Nations convoy carrying vital food supplies in central Gaza on February the 5th, before ultimately blocking the trucks from progressing to the northern part of the territory. This is just one example of many such attacks on aid convoys and civilians. The attacks and intimidation of aid workers doesn't stop there. Israeli extremists congregate at crossing points into Gaza and attack, loot and destroy aid coming in, even attacking truck drivers themselves, with the ultimate aim of discouraging any international aid from entering the territory. For those that manage to enter, aid trucks aren't simply free to move around about Gaza as needed. They must coordinate with Israel and get approval to move around the territory. Reports often show that trucks, once in Gaza, are left in limbo or in waiting for Israeli approval to get to where they need to go. Even when approval is eventually granted, Gaza's road network has been so badly decimated that the sheer amount of rubble and destruction makes it impossible to deliver aid to those who most need it. All the while, truck drivers expose themselves to the risk of bombs, bullets, and looting. And for those who are not intimidated or discouraged from entering Gaza, Israel refuses entry for prominent UN observers, international journalists, and international investigators. For example, Francesca Albanese, UN Special Rapporteur for Palestine, has been refused entry to Gaza. In fact, all special representatives to Palestine have been refused entry to Palestinian territories since 2008. In another example, the Board of Foreign Press Association in Israel has expressed shock that 9 months into the war, Israel still bars international media from entering Gaza, calling it draconian and adding that it raises questions as to what exactly Israel doesn't want international journalists to see. This open letter was co-signed by some of the world's most high-profile journalists and broadcasters, including Lindsay Hilsum of Channel 4, Christiane Amanpour of CNN, Alex Crawford of Sky, and Jeremy Bowen of the BBC. Seasoned, experienced war correspondents and journalists who recognise that what Israel is doing is both suspicious and unprecedented. Worst still, the recent ICJ provisional orders in the genocide proceedings against Israel have ordered that investigators are allowed in. This has so far not been permitted by the Israelis, just another in many flagrant violations of international law. So it's not surprising that the UN says that analysis in Gaza has been hampered when UN observers and investigators are not allowed in, when UN workers are attacked and killed, when aid trucks are refused permission to move through Gaza or are simply bombed, when UNRWA has been undermined and disabled, and when no journalists have been allowed in to report. It's entirely predictable that detailed evidence of the current health situation is lacking. Of course, the very strategic engineering of hunger and destitution has a historic precedent. Gaza has been under a blockade since 2007, where a variety of food products have been denied entry under the pretext of dual use. Israel limited the amount of food entering Gaza based on calculations of how many calories each individual should have. Talk about being under occupation. Israel literally controlled the calorie intake of every Palestinian. Documents from a previous investigation showed that from 2007 to 2010, Israel deliberately reduced food imports to Gaza to minimal subsistence levels for a population that was then 1.5 million. Dov Weisglass, a senior Israeli lawyer to the Sharon government at the time, was famously quoted as saying, "The idea is to put the Palestinians on a diet." You see, sometimes we just have to believe the Israelis when they tell us what they plan to do. For instance, when Defence Minister Gallant said, "I have ordered a complete siege on the Gaza Strip, there will be no electricity, no food, no fuel, everything is closed," we should believe him. When Ben-Gvir, Minister of National Security, says Israel should withhold fuel from Gaza and reduce the humanitarian aid that enters, we should believe him. When Heritage Minister Amichai Eliyahu said, "We have to stop providing assistance to them, we want them to crawl to us and beg for a deal," we should believe him. When Tali Gottlieb, a Knesset member for the ruling Likud party, condemns the entry of aid to Gaza and says they should be, in her words, thirsted and starved, we should believe her. And the many, many, many more officials and TV hosts and public figures who have said the same, we should definitely believe them all, because that's exactly what is happening. B'Tselem, Yesh Din, Human Rights Watch, Oxfam, the World Food Programme, the United Nations, even the European Union have all condemned Israel for their role in the humanitarian crisis and starvation of Gazans, and almost all of these organisations have concluded that Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war. Even Israel's very own human rights organisations have said this. In fact, we have witnessed in real time, not in the history books, right under our very eyes, we have witnessed the fastest decline in a population's nutritional status ever recorded. This doesn't happen by accident, this is engineered starvation. In the report that has got propagandists super excited, the FRC say that the situation in Gaza remains catastrophic and there is a high and sustained risk of famine across the whole of the Gaza Strip. They add that whether a famine classification is confirmed or not does not in any manner change the fact that extreme human suffering is without a doubt currently ongoing in the Gaza Strip. This is brutal and will go down in history as a crime against humanity, and many of those enabling this will be condemned in the same way that we condemned those who aided and abetted the killing of 6 million Jews in the Holocaust. Only a few days ago, in early July, the UN released its latest analysis. 10 independent United Nations experts released a statement saying, "We declare that Israel's intentional and targeted starvation campaign against the Palestinian people is a form of genocidal violence and has resulted in famine across all of Gaza." You can either believe the Israelis and their propagandists who stand accused of atrocities, or you can believe the endless number of humanitarian organisations who condemn them. You decide. Israel has pushed nearly 2 million Palestinians in Gaza towards starvation. Half of these people are children. The people of Gaza don't much care whether it's called famine or anything else. They are starving. They can't feed themselves and they can't feed their sick, their elderly and their children. And while Israeli propagandists and cheerleaders rejoice and cling to the technicalities of a classification, children in Gaza continue to die.